And welcome. It's Inauguration Day, the day we witness the transfer of political power. And we have an incoming administration that plans to tackle major issues after voters sent a major message that they want to see changes to inflation and national security, just to name a few. So, as we all know, it's not always easy to take the campaign promises into office and also have Congress agree, at least quickly. So, a lot to discuss here as we talk about what Trump's first 100 days in office will look like on Inauguration Day. We are joined with our 21 News political panel. We are back at it, this time joined by former Mercer County Commissioner Matt McConnell, political consultant Andy Resnick, and 21 News Assistant News Director Justin Mitchell. Thank you so much for all being here. We have a lot to discuss. Trump promised here on day one that he would enact sweeping tariffs, that he would call for deportation of undocumented immigrants. What will we likely see within the first 100 days that's realistic that he could achieve? Andy, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, look, the first 100 days for any president, regardless, is going to be about creating that foundation. And I think that's really what this is about. I think this is a historic in nature administration in terms of him coming in not only with a majority in both houses, but also if you will, a supermajority in the Supreme Court in terms of conservative votes on the Supreme Court. So he really has carte blanche to push his agenda forward. And I think we'll see a lot of things quickly. But as far as the major steps, the deportation that he was talking about during the campaign, there are a lot of legal hurdles that's going to have to get through. That's not going to be, I don't think, full blast. That's not going to happen right off the bat. So they're talking, about this first week now, really just being a lot of those, reversing some of the policies of the Biden administration to kind of roll back some of the things on the border to make it easier for him to do what he wants to do long term. And I think across the board on a lot of different policies, you'll see little actions like that over the course of the first couple of weeks, and then allows him to kind of build larger scale from there.
Matt, I know you said you're waiting for it now. Let's see the proof in the pudding. You did the talk. Now it's time to walk the walk.
Yeah, and it's what's really interesting about this is it's sort of a do-over. It's almost better than the continuation because you have now a much more mature candidate or now president. Whenever he steps in there, it is one where he now has the ability to have that 4 years off, to think about it, build a team, move forward. It's going to be an exciting time, I think, for America. I think you're going to see a lot of action very quickly. Because I think he has made those promises and he's ready to move. And it really is one we're excited to see how quickly he moves. It's going to be interesting.
And again, like I mentioned, the undocumented immigrants, that's something that he's laying out here day one. He has details that he's been working on for quite some time, Justin, as we cover this in the media, how this will realistically unravel. What do you expect to see initially? And then as we continue to cover some of the different actions that are taken, some of these can be swift and some of them not so much.
Right. So I think there's a long answer to that because there's a couple ways it could go. So first of all, you're going to see a slew of executive orders on the first day. And you saw that the first term too. So I think there's a precedent for that. And they're going to cover mostly undoing previous executive orders from the Biden administration. That's the stuff that a president can do right out of the gate that sets a tone that says, I'm here to get a lot done right away. And there'll be probably significant ones. Then there's two ways that the agenda can play out. Now, in normal times, the way that I would see this playing out is the agenda is, he's got carte blanche, as Andy said, because he's got both houses of Congress, and he's not answerable for re-election, so he can not worry about that. However, some of the things that have been floated as policy promises now since the election differ from what was being said on the campaign trail, particularly when we talk about things like the cuts that are being proposed by House Republicans that would be used to offset extending the tax cuts, because they are cuts to programs like SNAP and Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. Now, here's where the rubber's going to meet the road, because a lot of Trump voters are from economically disadvantaged areas who were voting because they wanted to see things like lower prices. They rely on those programs, and you could have something of a pushback where they're not calling the White House saying, I'm not going to vote for you again. That's off the table. But the senators and congressmen who have to get on board with it, they're going to start feeling pressure from some of their constituents. And that's how agendas either get watered down or parts of it fail. Now, that's one way it could go. I'm not sure that's the way it's going to go. We have to remember this is not like any other president. This is a president who attempted to steal power when he lost it before. This is a president who repeatedly talks about extending his own authority. He's got the AP reported 2 days ago about questioning civil servants on their loyalty to him. My point being, his willingness to do extraordinary things to consolidate power and get things done in ways that are extra constitutional or unconstitutional have been demonstrated. And so that's where you get into things like the New York Times reported on January 5th that he was looking for a health crisis to pin as the reason for the mass deportations. Give me a disease, any disease. If the thinking is like that, find ways around the institutions, then that traditional pressure that would otherwise be brought to bear by the congressmen and senators that he needs for his agenda, that may not play as much of a role, and it could get into uncharted territory, and we haven't really seen that play out, at least not in the United States.
What are your thoughts, though, in terms of achieving the promises of reduction of spending? So breaking down, he's looking at policies, programs, he's enacted DOGE, that group, to look at things as well. And they're going to do that maybe line by line. But at the same time, there's other ways to offset inflation. So Matt, when you look at nothing in a vacuum, okay, the whole scope.
As a business person, and I used to have a manufacturing company, and I dealt with tariffs, and I dealt with those that on the first go round with them, and quite frankly, China did eat it. China ate for the first year 100% of the tariffs that were put in for some of the product that I bought from them, because I was buying some of the raw product that then we produced here. That is a pushback. That it cost our customers nothing. And in fact, year 2, they said we can't take it all, and we split it. But now I knew that they could take 10, 20% off. That's how much their profits were. And we were able to negotiate, or we were going to find a different supplier. So I think that you're going to see actually more action than we anticipate. I do believe that he will probably start with some of the easy ones are the ones that are violating laws, anybody that's on lists. It was one, whenever I went on vacation this summer, I was down in Cancun, there was ads run for Turkey, for people to live out their dreams, come through Cancun, they will take them to the border and then come across. So this is not one of those where it is just one country. And my question as being a past manufacturer is, the work visas for folks. Right. I do believe that you're going to look at it very quickly. I think there will be some deportations almost on day one. It's going to be tough. It's a logistic nightmare to do it to the scale that he said. And quite frankly, I think it may be an opportunity if people are willing to come through and do paperwork, the rest of it. It may be a little bit more easy to deal with, or to back away from deporting everybody. I don't know if that's his intention. And I do believe that some of the tax cuts aren't about necessarily just slashing and burning. And some of the people that have voted for him understand that efficiency doesn't necessarily mean it's how much money you throw at it. Okay. And he is looking at taking away some of the bureaucracy. And quite frankly, I look at it, and somebody said, in the past, is these generals that weren't going to report to him on the first go round, they fear about his reprising it. It was like, he was commander in chief. That's a beautiful thing about the United States. We have a civilian commander in chief. If a general is not going to follow the commander in chief, we have a severe problem and issue. So I see some of those things as not that radical from a constitutional standpoint. In fact, I think he's going to more strict constitutional form, and I do believe that there will be some changes quickly. I have faith that he will be following up on some of these. I don't think it's just for a promise. I think he's reviewed it, looked at it, and he's had those 4 years to review with a team of folks. I was half tempted to volunteer for the Doge, but family got better of me.
Okay, you're busy over there in Pennsylvania. There's a lot going on. We want to talk about fracking too, because that's a factor within this. But Andy, chime in, because
I want to weigh in here on a few things, and there's a lot of things that potentially weigh in there. One, I think when it comes to spending, I think it's going to be very difficult for him to fully reduce spending like he's been talking about during the campaign. And every president does that, let's be honest, right? During the course of the campaign, every president says, I'm going to reduce spending, I'm going to bring down cost and inflation, and it's very difficult to actually do. And the first few things that he's been talking about right off the bat, extending the tax cuts, right? Extending that kind of legislation that's due to expire at the end of this year through that expiration date, extending that's going to cost money. The tariffs, I'm not necessarily worried about the initial tariffs. I'm worried about the retaliatory tariffs that come from the countries that we're attacking, right? The verbiage that Trump is using right now is straight up, we're going to have trade wars. And I've been involved in trade wars before when I was working for trade associations in D.C. And I've sat there and I've said, okay, I was involved in a case where it was the Mexico had put a tariff on dolphin-safe tuna, of all things, right? On dolphin-safe tuna coming from or going into the United States. Or the retaliation, when the United States retaliated on steel, the retaliation from Mexico was corn, sugar, pork. So all of a sudden now you've got this blown up situation where you have multiple industries are now involved in this trade war that started with one particular commodity or one particular product, and that price now passes its way down to the entire consumer base across the country. So it's going to be very hard to bring down cost and very hard to bring down spending and very hard to say that I'm going to prices in the grocery store are going to come down, and he's already admitted that, right? So those are things that he's already acknowledged that may not live up to the hype that he was presenting on the campaign. The other thing, if we want to talk about generals just for a second, generals have an obligation to the Constitution, right? Regardless of who sits in the whatever civilian sits in the president's office, if they are violating the Constitution, the generals have the obligation to adhere to the Constitution. So if there are things where he's going to go beyond, by all indications, Justin, I agree with you. It's a very scary time right now as far as the institutions of our democracy. And if he's going to go behind, then I would assume that the generals have an obligation to stand up and say, no, this is against the Constitution. We're not going to follow that order. And we'll see where it goes from there. That presents a whole different crisis. But the generals have an obligation to the Constitution first and foremost.
I want to ask, because I know you're in the strategy end of things. You're a consultant. You look at campaigns, covering them in the news as well. Sure. We talk to the voters firsthand. How much time within Trump's initial year, 100 days, within that range, how much time are the voters going to give him to lower prices? Like I said, they gave him a referendum in November. Yeah. We want lower prices. We're not happy. And they voted with their wallet. In a lot of cases, that's what the exit polls showed. So at what point do you think he may run into some trouble?
I think, look, after the first year, you'll probably start seeing, if it doesn't start happening, you'll probably start seeing it in those approval numbers. And I think the real test is going to be the midterm elections, right? Normally, somebody, the sitting president loses seats in the midterm elections. Every now and then, that doesn't happen. But I think that'll be the true test. When we get to the midterms, do Republicans lose seats? Do they even lose a majority? And that will be able to show, right, what's the mood of the country right now heading into that next presidential.
I think that that's largely true, but there's also going to be a split because remember, there's two types of Trump voters. There's I want lower egg price voters, and there's MAGA voters. The MAGA voters, probably they don't turn no matter what. At this point, I mean, he's been on the scene long enough to know that they're as loyal as we've ever seen in American politics. So they're going to stay there. And they make up, 40%. So the numbers do have a floor and a ceiling. But the lower prices voters, I don't know, they might not give him that much time because of his own words. I mean, when he says I can do it on day one, well, then they're going to be watching for day one.
I would just want to comment on something there, and feel free to correct me. I think we do a disservice, and this is somebody who does not agree with the MAGA side. I think we do a disservice to really what Trump was able to accomplish within the Republican Party by labeling that side of the party the MAGA Trump Republicans, right? I think to date, right now, it's clear that's the Republican Party.
Sure.
And I think we have to be able to call it what it is. That is the base of the Republican Party. So just like any other base of a party, they're not going to move as easily as any other voter. But I think for all intents and purposes right now, that side of the party is the base.
Oh yeah, you see the traditionals like DeWine going down to Mar-a-Lago to talk about what he's going to do with Vance's seat, giving it to Houston. So that is a good point to make.
Like or dislike him, you have to respect him. Right. And I think, I take probably a little bit of a different view of the midterms because the MAGA was more about the presidential race. And then the first go round in his first presidency, he didn't have as many Republicans in Congress supporting him. The Republicans, as nature, are somewhat independent of each other. They just are independent thinkers. They tend not to vote as a bloc, and they will potentially slow them down.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a whole lot less this go-round than last go-round because a lot of the Republicans that actually wanted to be the old school country club Republican, let me call it that, ended up getting beat in elections, right? If you weren't willing to go ahead and sort of change to being for the working man and woman for that purposes, and really the MAGA Make America Great Again is, too many people put put it as MAGA versus what it really stands for. Is how can that be bad, right? If it's true policies, and let us go ahead and debate those. And I think you're going to have people, and I think that's the reason why the governor chose who he did for Ohio in the Senate, is because I don't think that probably went along with what Trump wanted. I think that went along with what Ohio needed for their perspective. So I don't disagree. There are still areas where the Republicans are they don't vote as one bloc. And that has created some problems and issues in the past. I think there's going to be discussions back and forth. That always hurts because cut somebody else's pork, not mine. And I think everything has to be available. But the question is what can you cut that really doesn't take away? And what happened in the first go round was some of the rules and regulations were softened and lightened, because those oftentimes are very expensive for companies. Now, is there some sweet spot in between? I don't say take away everything and let the companies and employers go crazy. When you hear drill baby drill, it doesn't mean we're going to destroy the environment.
But I want to ask you about energy then, because are you hearing, anticipating more drilling, fracking in Pennsylvania? What are you finding out?
It
from
all's going to
folks?
depend on pricing.
Okay.
And it also depends on pipelines. For the last 4 years, pipelines have been basically, any new pipelines have pretty much been shut down. And so the problem occurs is you can drill as many wells as you want. If you can't get it to market, you've got a problem. In Mercer County, we actually have an advantage because they can't get all the gas out. So people that are industries in our area actually pay less, NYMEX minus a certain percent. So we're below market rate in Western Pennsylvania, and it's one of the reasons for some of the rebirth of industry. If you have a smelter, if you're going to need to melt aluminum, you're going to do some of those kind of things. Cheap energy is extremely important.
I know that was a big issue during the election. Everyone wanted to know how Kamala felt about the situation with the fracking. Did she support it? The whole, focus was on that for a little bit of time within the news cycle. But that brings me back to what's happening within not just the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party. I heard Fetterman had gone down to Mar-a-Lago as well to meet with Republicans. And I'm wondering if you think, Andy, who's going to emerge as the Democratic leaders that may also play a little bit with the Republicans on legislation to hold on to their voter base, because they have a mix in terms of constituents?
Well, Fetterman is clearly one of them.
Right.
He's always been one who, I think, to his credit, has never really shied away from bucking his party if it's in the interest of his constituents, right? And there are policies, obviously, that he stands for that not everybody agrees with. But at the end of the day, he's never been one who's shy of that. Look, I think the Democrats right now are in a state of trying to figure out who they are and where their bench is. And I think, unfortunately, a presidential primary is a rough and tumble thing for any party. And I think, unfortunately, I think the ones who are going to cross that bridge and try to reach out and work in a bipartisan fashion aren't going to make it through a presidential primary. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast. So I don't think any of those names that you might see right now in D.C. or in Congress that are doing that are going to be the names that pop up 4 years from now as a frontrunner.
Yeah, I'm wondering within the news cycle, are you seeing anyone, and what do you anticipate? Because in history, have the Democrats been in this spot where they've got to now regroup? Even Sherrod Brown called for that after his loss.
Well, they've been in that position many times, but the question is, what's a regroup look like? Because, for instance, there were people on the campaign trail painting Harris as very far to the left. Policy-wise, there's lots of people in the Democratic Party or outside that would say, well, no, the problem wasn't that she was too far to the left, it was that she was too moderate. And an interesting thing I read just today, because like you mentioned, getting through the primary cycle, but of current sitting U.S. senators, do you know what senator has the highest approval rating in the U.S. Senate? Anybody?
It's Tim Kaine.
It's Bernie Sanders.
Oh, yeah.
So, but my point
That
being...
actually doesn't surprise me.
Well, but my point being that the idea that, like, we just saw an election that went hard right, and yet also we have a progressive constituency with no home somewhere. So yeah, the Democrats are in the process of regrouping, but they have to figure out what the sweet spot is. Are they a progressive party? Are they a moderate party? Are they casting aside 40 years of kind of agreeing with the Republicans on a lot of economic issues, or do they need to go the other direction? You know, Biden in a lot of ways went the other direction, and he wasn't rewarded for it, but it was also 1 4-year term. Is it a slow shift one way? They have to figure out where the tectonic plates of politics are right now, and then double down on it for a while and see if it grows fruit.
Yeah.
And not be ready to change your entire brand every election cycle.
You can be a progressive party and have a progressive movement and go talk to the voters that you're losing at the same time, right? And I think that's the nature of what's, and not to digress too far away from the inauguration, but I think that's kind of the nature of where the Democratic Party is right now, right? They're always trying to figure out, it's always a zero-sum game, if you will, right? It's, well, we have to be ultra-liberal at the expense of this base in the flyover states in the Midwest, right? You don't have to be. You can be progressive and talk to rural voters. You can be progressive and talk to blue-collar voters. And that's what the Democrats have lost over the last 25, 30 years, even starting with Obama.
Make a case to the people who aren't listening to
Right,
you.
exactly.
Matt, do you agree? Or do you
Well,
think that the policy also really matters?
It's both parties, and quite frankly, let's get the politics out of it and start serving American people.
Sure.
And that is what Trump
fair.
brought forward. Okay, and I don't come from the political science realm. It's whenever I look at elections, they're looking at what do I believe in? Okay, the voters are what do I believe in? Look at the customer first, and that is the voter. And Trump went ahead and basically threw any kind of Republican plan out the window. He was originally a Democrat, right? He was probably an independent as well. But all of a sudden he decided, hey, you know what? We're going to come in and we're going to listen and we're going to actually start addressing some of these. And that's where he won areas like Mercer County and so Western PA, Eastern Ohio. All of a sudden he was talking to us. And it made all the sense in the world. It was about America, right? And we can't be, and this is one where I kind of scratch my head with Fetterman because he never worried about shocking anybody. He would fly the flag out of the Capitol in Harrisburg. He would make comments at meetings. He has sort of remade himself to the better. And a lot of people, and it's like, hey, let's see whether he still stands there or not, whether this is a political move. Right. But I really believe, let's get the politics out of it. And I don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican, but start finding out what the constituents need. And we need jobs. We need to get some of the stuff out of the way. Right. And this is where I think Trump's message comes across. And this is where I think he will. I think the American people understand that one person can't do it so quickly by himself. And so it's going to be interesting to where the Congress, and of course the people put the Senate and the Congress in his right squarely in his side. And it depends whether he gets the support out of that to make some of the moves.
And I want to, go ahead.
Sorry, Lindsay.
No, you're good.
And I'm all for getting politics out of it. I think we do, right? I think, and we've talked at length for one of our last panels about how that's really been the detrimental to our democratic institutions. But it's hard to take the politics out of it, regardless of what the president, what as of today the president is saying. If at the same time, out of the other side of his mouth, he's talking about going after and prosecuting his political opponents. So that's not taking the politics out of it, right? And that's something that I think the American people are going to have to try to figure out and wrestle with themselves over the next 4 years.
To that end, that's one other aspect of what I'll be watching for is our business, media, and whether or not what role we need to play here. Because I'm not sure that we're getting off on a great footing. And when I say we, I don't mean this station, I mean national media primarily. But when you have anybody in power, and again, talk about getting the politics out of it, anybody in power who there's every indication that they have a willingness to abuse that power, and I mentioned the loyalty test. I mean, when you're talking about getting rid of career civil servants to make sure that everybody will follow your whim, that's got the potential to be very, very chilling. So media, what I'm seeing right now is I see the Washington Post and CBS News softening their tone, a lot of talk about people stories, and And we've never needed a watchdog more than we need right now. That's not a partisan thing. It's not because Donald Trump's a Republican. As you mentioned, he's been every party under the sun. It's not about being a Republican. It's just as the same as when people should have gone after Biden, because the Hunter Biden pardon was also
awful.
arguably a major abuse of power. And so there needs to be blowback on these things regardless. And this is this is a president taking office today who has already bent to the point of near breaking the institutions. That has to be called out aggressively in order to maintain this thing that makes us all American.
But did the press not hurt themselves because you go ahead and say the pardon? I will take it earlier and say the Hunter Biden laptop.
Right.
Okay, and the lack of reporting of the Hunter Biden laptop by the press, and that absolutely was going to be squashed. Okay, that was not even allowed to come out before the election. Should have come out. There are illegalities in it, obviously, or he wouldn't need to do a blanket pardon on everything and anything that he possibly have done over the last 10 years. But the press left that behind, and that is some of the problem. Is the press has to be held so accountable to actually tell the truth and be fair.
Sure.
I don't care about balance, but be fair.
I'm glad you said that, Matt, because there is a difference between fairness and balance. And I agree, balance is often to the detriment of press. It's fairness, and sometimes fairness is not balance, but let's be fair. And you're right, the Hunter Biden laptop story should have been pursued more than it was at the national level.
It wasn't pursued, it was squashed.
It was
that was the problem.
Sure. Now, there could be look, I'm a news editor for a long, long time. I can't speak to what was going through anybody's heads as to whether or not that was properly vetted at the time that they were squashing it. So I'm not going to weigh in on that. But what I'm more concerned about is things like this defamation suit against ABC News, which was a bogus suit that absolutely ABC would have won. And they took the stance to settle it, thus laying down a blueprint for how to go after a free and independent press. That's a chilling thing, and the press needs to not back down like ABC did.
I think the media is in a tough spot. I think just like everyone's finding their way, it almost, the media has to do something to restore the trust of the public, and that's something we work on every day.
Sure.
We ask the tough questions. Don't be afraid to push both sides. That's your job. I mean, they're going to write their own playbook and their own history books and that's up to them, especially at the mainstream level. Here at the local level, we do our due diligence, and then we're watching that all play out in real time.
And I'll say I agree that, hey, the Constitution has to be followed, okay? And that is where the press and the watchdogs absolutely have to be there. Will there be things going in front of the Supreme Court? Sure, there will be. Because he's a business person. He's a business person that goes ahead and drives it. Well, that was a law that was passed by Congress. I don't know how an executive order can undo a law that was passed and signed, right? That is not the rule of an executive order. Can they slow it down? I always hated when Biden or Trump or anybody else said, you know what, that's the law, but I'm not going to enforce it. It's like, okay, illegal immigration, it's the law, but I'm not going to enforce it. You pick whatever you want, I'm not going to enforce it. They took an oath, and I took that same oath whenever I took office, or very one similar, is that I will uphold the Constitution and laws of the state in which I'm in. That needs to be followed. I always get so upset about it, and I don't think anybody should give leeway. I don't think anything should be an exemption.
Just follow the law.
Just follow the law. But here's the question: is you have the law. And then you have all these rules and regulations created by bureaucrats that aren't allowed to be removed from office that all of a sudden make it impossible. And that was not actually the intent of the folks. I think it was Gorsuch, when he was going into the Supreme Court. He said, listen, I will rule on things that I don't agree with. But I will rule with it as the Constitution, because it's not my job to create the law. And if the congressmen and the senators want to be lazy, it's not my job to give them an easy out, right? And so push it back, get those folks to do what they want. Elections have consequences. You better listen to the people.
And I want to bring it home just real quick because I want to wrap this up here shortly. But when it comes to the repercussions, one of the things that I think we're on I guess you probably would agree with me at this point, we're on the cusp of a turning point in manufacturing with the electric vehicles. We're there, but we're not all the way there. Not everyone's buying them. We don't have all the charging stations. We're kind of here, there, everywhere, figuring it out in the winter. They're not staying charged.
But they're certainly growing. The industry is growing.
And we've got a huge sector here in the Mahoning Valley. We have the EV battery plant. We have the Intel chip plant getting built down in Columbus. That may play a role. There's other places down in Georgia, the South. They're really big on the EV. There's a lot of money that's been put there. Now we have this incoming administration. Bernie Moreno publicly spoke about it because he's taking over in the U.S. Senate seat. And he beat Sherrod Brown in the fall. For folks kind of following this, in his most recent public speaking, he said he wants to have more vehicles built in the U.S. versus Mexico and China. He wants to take on the tariffs and also take on the EV tax credits. It's reported by the New York Post, which, give whatever weight you want to that article and that news organization.
Sports fantastic.
But he's quoted saying that he thinks that those tax credits are paying for more luxury vehicles than your average you and I driver in the community buying their next vehicle for a family or an individual. And he also said he wants to see another vehicle built in the Lordstown GM plant. So you've got a lot going on within that sector. Wondering if you think that Ohio has a lot to gain, if there's a lot of questions and concerns because of who's coming in. How do you feel about this industry? Because as you mentioned, you got to, court the voter. You have to listen to the voter. Mm-hmm. A lot of the rank and file of these local UAW workers, the steel workers, they didn't go along with their head honchos and endorsements. A lot of them voted Trump, which in my personal lifetime, I've not seen that. I grew up in a UAW household, full transparency. They vote straight down the ticket. They are loyal. And we're just seeing a different time with different technology.
Look, you get the jobs. A lot of people don't care, right? You bring the jobs here. You talk the talk and you walk the walk and you make it happen. People will follow you and they're not going to care. Look, I think, and we talked about this election night. One of the great things about that Senator Brown was able to do was seem like he was going to bat every day for those people, right? For those ones who lost their jobs at Lordstown, right? For those who lost their jobs in the steel mill, Brown was there for them every time. Right. And now I think that's great. I had not heard that about Moreno and him saying that. I think that's great that he's taking a page out of that and seemingly being the one who's going to step up and follow in those footsteps, even if he is Republican. Yeah. But yeah, if he can do if he can do it to get the jobs here, then people will follow him and people will believe him. I think it'll be very interesting to see, by the way, if he wants to cut back the EV tax credits.
Right. How does that play
with
out?
Elon Musk standing next to the president.
Well, I think Elon's already said, and that's the interesting thing, is Elon says, I'm not hurt as bad.
Yeah.
Because and he knew that he had to introduce an EV product that was top of the line.
Yeah.
He knew that, and that was something where GM and others made mistakes, is they were going to bring it in at the mid-level, and it was too expensive of a technology at that point.
Elon Musk also said that he wants to implement cuts that will potentially be a hardship on the American people, and those were his words. So I don't know where his head is and how long he's going to last around this administration, because these are, like, you talk about an immovable object versus an unstoppable force. That is going to probably end badly eventually.
I almost think that Elon, and I pray that it occurs, will step back away from the government side.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm not a Christian, and if I were,
you'd be praying.
I'd be rereading the book of Revelations with Elon Musk in mind, because he's got world domination on the mind, right?
Does he?
He seems to. They're offering him a castle for his European headquarters, and he's weighing in the German elections and the UK elections.
A lot of what he's doing is democracy. It's about getting it back. To buy Twitter and basically blow $35 billion.
He has endorsed neo-Nazi parties in 2 European nations. I don't know that that's democracy.
And I think look, these first 100 days, you had the policies coming out, and I just mentioned it before. I think those are the things you have to watch out for. Right, I think they've made trips, over to see the Hungarian Prime Minister. He's been to Mar-a-Lago a couple of times. They're taking a page out of that playbook already in terms of how he rolled back freedoms within that country in terms of freedom of press. And those are things to watch out for. Those are very, very real things to watch out for right now. And having people around him, like an Elon Musk, who doesn't necessarily know the bounds of government, who just really knows money and how it advances his cause. And I think some of the people that he's put up for very important posts in the administration that are basically going to sit there and say yes and not be able to push back on him, I think those are the things that you need to watch and want to see where that goes. Hopefully it doesn't go anywhere.
And let me push back just a little bit, because I'm a finance, I'm trained in finance, and Elon is more of an engineer than a money guy. He's not running investment bank.
By
He's
money, I
actually
mean billionaire. How's
producing,
that?
but
Sure.
he's
We are gonna
he's
Throwing
taking
his money
he's
around.
taking you to the stars. He's taking you to the EV that works. His technologies are just fantastic. I mean, but I hope he gets out of the government, right?
I think we can
I think
agree
we
on that.
all
Yeah,
agree.
we can agree on that.
Unrelated question, Matt, but I got to ask. You mentioned that you took a similar oath to what Donald Trump took today. Is the difference in Western PA that you put your hand on Dan Rooney's autobiography?
No.
Okay.
No, but let's not bring that up at this this point of the season.
Okay, it's early. And like I said, we're just on Inauguration Day here. Great conversation. Thank you so much for everyone sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
We can do it in one room. We're adults. Let's hope everyone else on Capitol Hill can do the same thing.
And that's
Really
the
appreciate
important
it.
thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
That really is.
Thank you so much for your time. If folks want to check out this whole entire 21 News political podcast, we've got them up over on our WFMJ Facebook page and also over on the 21 News app. Make sure you give us a follow and subscribe over on YouTube too.